Tonight on Enough Said with KFAN Radio's Dan Barreiro.
And by the way, they're not all true. Some of them are stupid, mindless, and easily disproved. They also bring back booze. I actually think more booze would actually bring about perhaps better results and maybe even quicker decision
How about
making.
clearer thinking?
Attorney and HoldingCourtPodcast.com's Ron Rosenbaum.
I always get next to the guy who sings the loudest, doesn't know the words, okay, and is completely off key. How many times have you been shot at in the last week, just out of curiosity?
I hope none that I'm
been a
aware
slow
of,
week.
put it that way.
Okay.
And executive producer Lori Fisher, who is keeping these guys on track and deciding when enough said.
End of story.
Okay,
In
enough
this case,
said with
usually,
that. Let's kick things off right away with anthem etiquette. There was the complaint that not enough Twins players are standing up during the national anthem before the game. Is that the right way to measure patriotism, Dan?
I love this. This is one of my favorite subjects, Ron. I think yours too. It's the game of measuring patriotism. And nothing sickens me more than this game because all it measures is surface stuff. And in the case of these players, some of them have routines that especially at home, that they follow. So some of them are out there. Some of them are doing other things to prepare for the game. But we always have these patriotism monitors who decide this is the way you have to do things. And when I think of particularly players, shouldn't we measure it more on the basis of, let's say, Jared Allen, who's involved in all kinds of Wounded Warrior projects, things like that?
We should do it by what people do. This sort of, you're a patriot, you're not a patriot. I saw you, you weren't on the field. What do we do about the people who are getting hot dogs during the game? Are they less patriotic? What about the people that are whispering to maybe their kid or somebody during the national anthem? How about the people who have their hands over the heart? Are they more patriotic? Are they less patriotic? I think patriotism is more measured by how people live their lives.
Each
Do
day.
you support the country? Do you go to work? Are you a good father? Do
Let
you
me throw
support
this into
the
the mix.
country?
How do we, it's sort of grandfathered in as tradition that this is what we do at games. And I'm not against it, but we don't do it at the opera.
Why not?
We don't do it at
not?
plays. And so, exactly, why is that always in the mind of some people, the way we measure, I'm going to prove to you that I'm a greater patriot?
What
because
about
I
the
stand at better
fans,
attention.
like at a Game 7, who start cheering literally right from the beginning of the national anthem? Are they not patriotic? This idea of a litmus test, I caught you. What about the guy, as you mentioned to me earlier, what about the guy who's not paying attention to the anthem, but he's shooting the video?
Well, this is, I think, a little bit of a phony story because there was, I think, literally one complaint. And you can always find, as we've learned in Pitchfork Nation, one complaint very easily. It's a waste of time. Are you bothered by people who even want to sing the anthem? I love it. If you want to sing while it's being played, do it. But the idea that I'm going to get to evaluate you.
I always get next to the guy who sings the loudest, doesn't know the words, okay, and is completely off key. I mean, listen, I think people should show respect during the national anthem. But taking attendance, I don't buy it.
Dirty little secret, too. I got some emails from some veterans who say when they're on bases and they knew it was about time for reveille or for the anthem to be played at sunset, they would often try to run inside to avoid it. Are they not patriotic, or are they saying, this is surfacey stuff, I love my country, I don't necessarily need other people to evaluate me or measure me on maybe having something else to do?
To me, it's like the guys who wear flag pins. They're patriotic.
And
if
you're
you're not wearing a flag pin, you're not patriotic.
Explain
you may
yourself.
have fought for your country. You may have risked your life, but you're not a patriot like I'm a patriot. I'm just not a big fan of this band.
Okay, enough said on that one. Let's move on to a heartbreaking story. 90-year-old Earl Olander of Carver County, he was killed. His house was ransacked last month. And then just this week, police announced they arrested 2 suspects. Actually, a Bible was the big break in the case. One of the suspects allegedly had the Bible in an old apartment and had Earl's name in it. This is just such a heartbreaking story, Dan.
Well, it's horrible on so many levels, Ron. And what struck me is that I don't believe they had a lot of strong leads in this case. They were scrambling a little bit, and it was, I guess you could say, a combination of luck and the vigilance of a citizen.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the lesson, is that we got a guy who's cleaning the former apartment of one of the suspects.
Finds the Bible with
savings bonds.
Save American savings bonds in them with supposedly the defendant's name on it, and then follows up. Rather than go cash the bonds, what he does is he goes on the internet, finds out it's a murder. But the irony, Dan, you almost can't make it up, of solving really one of the worst crimes I've seen in a lot of years in Minnesota by a Bible. But it raises another question. Is this going to cause people to once again get up in arms about, there's a allegation, I don't know if it's true, but at least an allegation that these guys are here, or at least one of them is here illegally. My only attitude about that is we've got plenty of American citizens who know how to commit crimes, but isn't this another element of the case?
As it goes national, every story where there's a chance to get political, as you know, somebody will seize it on either side. And so that is, be ready, because that's coming nationally.
But do you think it's a legitimate element of the story?
No, I think it's legitimate to the extent that the judge said, this is going to affect my decision on whether to allow you to go free.
Well, they're not going to get out on bail.
It wouldn't matter. But that, to me, is the only place where it's actually relevant. The other element is, it's so invasive. The idea of this is a person who was in the home doing work, painting, I believe, and had been working with someone else for like 10 years. And, we all have people who come into our homes for various reasons to get jobs done. And it has to be such a feeling for that family that's got to be grieving terribly, the extended family, the idea of the invasiveness of this thing, of the violation here.
That's the element that I think ought to cause people to at least consider who they have in their house. People might have cleaning ladies, they might have handyman. I don't know, because it sounds like one of these two guys was helping him paint, and he trusted him, and he knew him, and he gave him water.
The relationship went back 10 years with the person that they
But
was
I'll
in
tell
the
you one
company.
thing, there's a lot of elements of this story, and in a way, for a lot of people, I'm sure it's kind of scary.
And the scariest part is just the awful nature of a 90-year-old man minding his own business, and they take full advantage of what they think is, we got an easy mark here.
Died in almost the most awful way you could, with duct tape around him.
And they bring the Bible why? They bring the Bible because afterwards they're going to feel guilty.
I was trying to figure out why they took the Bible in the first place. I mean, and then if you took the Bible, why did you leave it?
You're not going to repent after. If you're capable of this level of
I don't think
crime, heinous crime, you're not capable. We were supposed to be able, Ron Rosenbaum, to believe in the bin Laden raid, that the narrative that was offered up was the correct one. We now have a huge investigative report that goes on for pages and pages by your guy, Cy Hirsch, that says, don't believe anything that you read. And it does kind of remind us that I don't think we are allowed, whether this is legit stuff or not, which we can argue about, we're no longer allowed, and we haven't been allowed for a long time, to believe any narrative about anything. So does that go back to JFK, the assassination?
It goes all the way back to the Lincoln assassination, for God's sake. Did John Wilkes Booth actually do it? And was there actually, how big was the conspiracy?
Pearl Harbor.
Dan, you go to Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt allowed this to happen. That's never been solved. Kennedy assassination, there's 10,000 books. The Martin Luther King assassination. Did James Earl Ray do it? No.
9/11.
The family got involved.
Bush did 9/11.
Didn't do it. And then you got the RFK assassination with Sirhan. Sirhan alone. Was he part of the Palestinian cause? And you got 9/11. The problem with this, to me, is that when people no longer believe anything or almost anything the government tells them, how do you have a democracy, Dan? Because it wasn't always that way. I think, at least for my generation, the Kennedy assassination, this big giant Warren report, which then was called into question, was really the first time we really questioned whether the government was lying to us.
That was a lot of it, but I'm a big believer in some skepticism, okay?
You think?
The government's lied from time to time, but I think this has become such a cottage industry that we've got, for example, on Kennedy, there's 15,000 conspiracy theories. There's
a new one today. There's 15,001.
Oliver Stone did about 30 in the same movie, and I'm saying, let's have some intellect involved in this. Let's not throw just because you can go online and plug in any conspiracy and say that George Bush had something to do with the Kennedy assassination or his forefather, that it might be true. And I think in this age, encourages this stuff. Because now, like I said, instead of talking to three guys in the bar, hey, I don't trust what they said on this, you get yourself online with a lot of people, you Google it, and you plug it in, and everybody, you can find people immediately say that's just true. And by the way, they're not all true. Some of them are stupid, mindless, and easily disproved.
Well, easily disproved. We actually watch the 9/11 event on live television, and yet we're told we didn't see what we actually saw. There was no plane that flew into the Pentagon. That was all something government wanted you to believe. The Jews did 9/11, the Israelis did it, the Arabs did it, everybody did it but who you think did it. George Bush engineered it, Lyndon Johnson killed JFK. At some point, Dan, it used to be that really a small group of people. I think there's a huge number of people that don't believe anything the government tells them.
In JFK's case, I think it's because most people got their history on that assassination from the Oliver Stone movie, which is a lie. He's even admitted it. He just said, well, the Warren Commission was one myth, I'm giving you a counter myth. But he just made it up as he goes along, and I don't think that's the same thing as having healthy skepticism about a government that, yes, we've learned is capable of making stuff up from time to time.
But every event, you can go to Vietnam, you can go to 9/11, you can talk about Pearl Harbor. I just think at the end of the day, it takes a toll on how Americans feel, because this is theoretically a government of the people, by the people. When the people don't believe anything the government says, I think it's very dangerous.
Okay, let's leave it there and move on to Dr. Ben Carson. He announced that he's running on the Republican presidential ticket, and recent comments suggested by him is that he believes that the president may not have to follow Supreme Court decisions. Does he have a point, Ron?
Well, the answer is no. Okay, stated very simply. The problem is he cites a case that President Lincoln questioned, which was the Dred Scott case. Terrible decision. Basically said black people have no rights that white people are bound to respect. But what Lincoln never said is I'm not obligated to follow it. But just think of the consequences if Carson is right. That means when there was the Gore v. Bush decision, 5-4 in the United States Supreme Court, Clinton said, I think I'd rather have Gore. It's an interesting decision, but I'm not going to follow it.
Yeah.
Nobody in the South nobody in the North even probably liked Brown versus Board of Education. Got rid of basically legalized segregation in the South. President Eisenhower said, it's an interesting decision, but let's ignore it.
Well, it is harder.
We become a banana republic without a court.
You're right, and it's obviously always, though, going to be harder to want to uphold a law as awful as Dred Scott. It's always easy when it's Brown versus Board of Education, where most of us agree.
Not in the South it wasn't easy.
Well, no, but I'm saying in retrospect, as we look back on all of those decisions, but look, the concept as I understand it, you're the constitutional guy. I don't know if it's actually in the Constitution.
It's not.
The court, that's what I was.
It's not.
But we now believe it's kind of settled, and it becomes, as you say, chaos. We become one of those banana republics from a Woody Allen film if we make it up as we go along.
We become a dictatorship. If the president can decide, let me give you a perfect example, the Nixon tapes. 9-0, the United States Supreme Court said, Richard Nixon, you have to give up the tapes, which eventually caused his resignation. What if he says, well, that's an interesting decision, but I'm not going to do it? At some point, what you have really is a dictatorship. And nowhere in the Constitution, by the way, does it say that the United States Supreme Court has the final word. But think of the consequences if they don't.
And the concept for me, I like in principle, which is the unelected folks are the ones who are going to be the ultimate arbiter. We maybe give ourselves, and maybe I'm naive, because there's a lot of politics in who gets in on the Supreme Court. But it gives us our best chance to say, these are the folks that we like to think, somebody's got to have the final word, will rise above all the other politics and not have to worry about being elected. And if we don't, we lose what we're about.
If you listen to Carson, nobody has the final word. The president may or may not follow the Supreme Court.
Do you think he really means it? Do you think he really believes it? Or is this what we've talked about almost every week, that half of the answers from these guys politically is they're saying what they think on a given subject that their alleged constituency wants to
I'll tell you
hear.
what I think is even worse. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon. I don't think he understands it.
I just want to point out, though, he is picking up some steam. A new Fox News poll out this week shows that he's tied for support with Jeb Bush at 13%. That same poll Carson got 6% last month.
Well, I think a
Polls
lot
are
of people
meaningless.
agree with him, but I don't think they think it through. If you have a country without judicial review at the end of the day, you got a dictatorship.
Polls are meaning. I don't. And I hate these polls that you take every 3 days.
Right.
How forgotten will this poll be next week? Let alone by the time we're actually close
I think
to the
he's gonna
nomination.
be the next
He's
Herman
not.
Cain.
He's not. He doesn't have no chance.
He's not
going to
be the nominee.
Zero
I
chance.
totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean.
Welcome back to Enough Said. It's the end of an era for late night on CBS. David Letterman is retiring. Next Wednesday night is his last night after 22 years. I know this is emotional for you guys, huh?
Well, I'll tell you what. What's funny about this is I can still remember. I think it was 1980. So I was actually young then. I was 25 years old, and there was a new morning show, morning David Letterman show, and I loved it. And it lasted, I think, 4 months. But you could see this is the kind of show that was going to speak to me. And I think a lot of people in my age group felt that way, that this is the difference, I think, and Letterman obviously eventually they were smart enough to put him on late night, was it was the kind of show where you felt like you were in the club. Yeah. You kind of got it. You got the bits, you got the jokes.
Or you weren't.
Or you weren't.
Okay, I mean, for my parents, they didn't really get Letterman. I mean, it sort of has gone in eras. I mean, it started with Steve Allen, then Jack Paar, and then Johnny Carson, who was really hip in the beginning, and then for our generation, he began to look old. And then Letterman, who was really like sort of the Animal House generation, the wise guy kind of show.
The anti-talk show host.
The anti-talk show host. Yeah. And the morning show was that, and then it was more than 22 years. It goes all the way back 30-some years. I think it was 22, maybe he was on CBS. But now, to be honest with you, he's beginning to look old.
And he knows it.
And he's
self-aware enough to know
he's getting out. The other thing is, it may be the last real talk show. In other words, a show that actually goes inside and we find things out about celebrities. I get the impression, I like Jimmy Fallon, I like Jimmy Kimmel. They seem more like variety shows to me, Dan.
They're talented. They don't need my approval. But they're also, at least in Jimmy's case, very sycophantic.
Which
I mean,
Jimmy Fallon.
Fallon. Very, there's being respectful of your guest, which Carson obviously always did, was fine. Letterman didn't. That was part of Letterman's.
But they're not fans.
Don't fawn over each of these folks.
I agree.
Like, oh, you're a legend. Just get good stuff out of them. They are legends. That's self-evident, and that's what's changed. But that's apparently, I think, what the kids, they may want more of the variety show rather than what I call more of a. I won't call Letterman a pure talk show because I think Carson was more that, but closer to it, and I think we're fossils. I think most of the kids don't want that kind of show anymore.
Well, my favorite bit is when Letterman would stick the knife in and the air would come out of the huge stars.
The guests.
He would bring them down.
Make them uncomfortable.
Exactly. Fallon is, listen, I like Jimmy Fallon. He's tremendously talented. But he's a fan, and every time somebody
Did you see him on with Streisand?
I love you. I mean,
it was scary. Yeah. And look, what I like again, I think about Letterman, I think he knows it's probably time. But in his prime, beyond the guests, it was the bits, was it not? I mean,
thought
to
it was
me,
brilliant.
the Bud Melman stuff, all the little characters that he created, I thought made that show seem so fresh and different.
The greatest tribute to Larry Bud Melman, Bob Dylan comes on the show, says to Paul Schaefer, can you introduce me? Schaefer thinks he's going to Letterman. Can you introduce me to Larry Bud Melman? Okay, this is Bob Dylan.
By the way, I think we both have come, though, we may have thought Carson was square at one point, but in retrospect,
the best.
He's still the guy.
The best.
And you know who knows that?
David Letterman.
Letterman understands that Carson is still
Letterman,
the guy.
Seinfeld, all those guys say we owe everything in our careers to Johnny Carson.
Okay,
and I agree with that.
Time for the lightning round. Let's start out with a famous nun, Sister Helen Progene, standing up for the Boston Marathon bomber, saying she truly believes that he's sorry. Ron, do you believe him?
Well, I'm thinking of the jury sitting 10 feet away from Tsarnaev, who's the Boston bomber, Sister Helen Progene, who's a huge opponent of the death penalty. Dead Man Walking was her movie. And she gets on set and says, he's very sincere. He's really sorry. And I'm sure the jury's going, Well, what about him? Do I get to hear from him? Why
do we
doesn't
need to
he
hear it
tell
from
me
him?
how sorry
I don't
he
even
is?
understand how that's supposed to be persuasive.
I don't know.
I don't think it is at all,
Well,
is
the
it?
problem is if you're a lawyer, you can't put Sarnaia
No, that's
on
it.
the stand. So you do the next best thing. But I guarantee you that's what the jury's thinking.
George Zimmerman back in the news this time. He was shot at. Can this guy just not lay low, Dan?
Well, you know, whatever we think did or didn't happen, and we were never, as we've talked about over the years, we're never probably going to know
We'll never
exactly
know.
what happened originally.
You're talking about the Trayvon Martin.
The Trayvon Martin. At some point, do you say, you know, I need to quit while I'm ahead? I need to go on some journey somewhere far away, learn to meditate a little bit, and get as far away from potentially
Guns!
more trouble
Every
than
single
ever.
time they're involved. How many times have you been shot at in the last week, Dan? Just out of curiosity.
I hope none
It's
that I'm
been a
aware
slow
of,
week.
put it that way.
Okay, back here at home, why is it year after year the legislative session always has to come down to the wire or a special session, Ron?
What is with these guys? I swear to God, my whole life, in the last week, in the last hour, they got 10,000 things to do. They all huddle, they're talking, and then we may have to go to special
called
session.
horse trading.
I would make the whole session 2 weeks. As long as you're getting to do everything in the last
long-
week, just make the whole session 2 weeks. What do they do for the X number of 4 months when they're meeting?
I'd also bring back booze. I actually think
I agree.
more booze would actually bring about perhaps better result and maybe even quicker decision
How about
making.
clearer thinking?
It can't hurt.
It can't
Let's
hurt.
put it that way.
They
That's
drive you
Okay, and
nuts.
last but not least, the next level of narcissism. We talked about selfie sticks before, but
Yeah.
now there are the drone selfies, and I know you want to get one, Dan.
Well, I already have one on order through Brookstone.
Oh, who doesn't?
I think they got it. I think
Yeah.
it's $369.95. Well, my favorite
Oh, you
version,
actually priced it.
Oh God, yes.
So
I'm
you're
going
serious
for it.
about
yes.
this?
But my favorite one
You
is
have a problem, by
it's
the
a
way.
boomerang drelfie, where this was a little smaller, where
A
you literally
drelfie?
That's what they call
A
drone selfies these days. See, I'm up on the lingo.
I can see
I
that.
pretend to hate it, but I really secretly love it.
you are a little
You
bit
throw
narcissistic.
It goes 30 feet away, you pose, it takes a picture of you, and even better, it comes right back to you.
If
I mean, how
this-
much better can you
You
get
can
in
use
terms
it
of
for
self-absorption?
surfing and family reunions. They say that's really good if you have a big group of people instead of one person trying to do it.
Well, that might be
Why don't
more
they move the big
legitimate.
group of people
Okay, enough
away
said
rather
for
than
tonight.
the selfie? It just seems to make a whole lot more sense. We are the most narcissistic people
You
on
think we're
earth.
self-absorbed?
Do I think we're self-absorbed? I don't think we're